All right, right now, let's shift gears just a little bit here on Live Now from Fox, and I want to take you out to a press conference from DHS, the Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem, talking about the new initiatives by TSA, as this one going to be popular among airline passengers, that the TSA will now allow all airport travelers to keep their shoes on. So that's a big deal for so many people. Let's take you right now out to Kristi Noem as she made these remarks here from earlier on Live Now.
We have started a new no shoes policy with the Department, the Transportation Security Administration. TSA will no longer require travelers to remove their shoes when they go through our security checkpoints. This is something that I know for quite some time people have talked about and discussed, and we know that when President Trump was elected that he pledged to make life better for all Americans, and that includes those who are travelers going through our busy airports. We want to improve this travel experience, but while maintaining safety standards and making sure that we are keeping people safe as they go to take their vacations, travel for work, or spend time with their families. So we took a hard look at how TSA does its business, how it does its screening processes, and what we do to make people safe, but also provide some hospitality as well. Now, this is especially important to streamline the process and look at efficiencies that we can build in as we build up for some big events that are going to be coming here in the next 12 months here in the United States of America. As you all know, right now, we have the club championships going on. A lot of travelers and visitors are coming into the country, but next year we will also have the Olympics that will be in the United States of America. The World Cup matches will be happening, as well as many America 250 events. All of those will bring us record travelers to the United States. Many, many people will be on airlines traveling in and out of our airports, and it's important that we find ways to keep people safe, but also streamline and make the process much more enjoyable for every single person. TSA first implemented the no shoes policy in 2006, almost 20 years ago. And in those 20 years, since that policy was put in place, our security technology has changed dramatically. It's evolved. TSA has changed. We have a multi-layered, whole-of-government approach now to security and to the environment that people anticipate and experience when they come into an airport that has been honed and it's been hardened. We are very confident that we can continue to provide hospitality to folks and for American travelers and for those visiting our country while maintaining the same standard of security for passengers and for our homeland. The key to our approach is layered security. Passengers will still pass through multiple layers of screening. They'll also go through identity verification, and in fact, TSA has recently experienced some fantastic success with implementing Real ID. As you know, Real ID was put into statute over 20 years ago, and we recently put that into place that it went seamlessly. In fact, right now we are experiencing over 94% compliance with passengers who come through our airports and screening processes with Real ID compliant identification. Now, as you know, most of those IDs, if they're driver's licenses, they'll have a star in the right-hand corner. They may use other federally recognized identifications such as passports or tribal IDs or military IDs. But many people thought that when Real ID was implemented that it would be difficult. It would, some in the mainstream media talked about it being Armageddon, that it wouldn't be able to happen, and it has happened seamlessly because of the hard work of those who work within TSA and because of our security officers who worked very hard to make sure that passengers were compliant, but to do it in a way that facilitated their traveler. So please, I'd encourage all Americans to still go out there if you don't have your Real ID yet. It does help us identify who you are and keep passengers safe, and we would encourage you to go so and to do that. Now, we're just getting started. We've implemented several transformational changes at TSA and our security checkpoints already just since the Trump administration has come into office. We have recently piloted different types of security lanes. We have family lane security checkpoints that are open at several airports that allow families to get screened separately from other people so that it can be very accommodating for them and their experience with children or small babies. We also have implemented around some of our air bases and facilities the ability to have a military lane that expedites the process for those who currently served in our armed services, those who are stepping up to defend our freedoms, that they can have a security checkpoint specifically dedicated to them and in those areas where we see high traffic volumes of those who serve. With this no-shoes policy, we anticipate that Americans and travelers and those coming into our country will be very excited that they will no longer have to remove their shoes. The one thing that I will say is that doesn't mean that there won't be times once in a while where someone will have to remove their shoes. If they get put into a different situation or need additional layers of screening where that may be asked of them. But overwhelmingly, the policy will be that no longer will that be required of every single person that comes to a checkpoint. The golden age of America is here. We're so excited that we can make the experience for those individuals traveling throughout our airports in the United States much more hospitable, more efficient for them, more timely, and that they can get to their destinations and spend much more time with their loved ones and with those accomplishing great things for their future. So with that, I will open it up to any questions that any of you may have. Yes, ma'am.
Thanks so much, Ellen from Bloomberg. Can you say whether travelers who don't have real IDs will have to take off their shoes?
Yeah, that is not going to be specifically required for individuals who don't have real IDs. They still won't have to take off their shoes. If they do get flagged for a different reason or need additional screening, that may be required of them, but they won't be specifically identified as someone who has to remove their shoes. I do want to introduce behind me, too, as well. We have some fantastic TSA officers behind us, some employees working with TSA, and then also we have Ha and Adam, who have been here working in leadership in TSA. That have been so grateful for them in their out-of-the-box thinking at how we implement reforms and make this experience much more available for those individuals who are traveling through our airports. I'll come to you next.
Good afternoon, Secretary Nicole Johnson from Reuters.
Yes.
Question, what recent changes to security equipment or threats data has offered you the assurance to make this change?
We've gone back and looked at our security processes, looked at the efficacy of everything that we do, every screening process that we have to see what results it is giving us, what information it is giving us about travelers, and then our technologies, if it's giving us the information we need as far as the screening of individuals, whether it's magnetometers or whether it is processes where they're being identified by a TSO. So all of that has been evaluated to see what is affected, what should stay in place, and what should be removed to streamline the process. Yes.
Hello. Roberto Macedonio for NTN 24. Mr. Secretary, I would like to ask you about President of Colombia, Gustavo Petro. He sent a letter to Donald Trump retracting his accusations about the U.S. government was doing a coup d'etat in Colombia. Do you have any opinion?
That the president was doing what in Colombia?
He was conspiring against the Colombian government to take them off of the power. This is what President Petro said about Marco Rubio. He sent a letter to Donald Trump retracting himself after these accusations. What do you think about that Petro did?
Well, I won't speak to that today since we want to focus on the American security here at our airports today. But I know that President Trump is working very hard to build relationships with all countries in order to make sure that we are returning their citizens back home that may be in our country illegally committing crimes. We've had conversations on security agreements with Colombia, and I know that also trade negotiations have been ongoing with the country as well, and we're hoping for a better relationship there. Yes.
Hi, Madam Secretary. Luke Barr with ABC News. Can you talk a little bit about what the next steps are, what the timeline looks like, when this will be implemented, and then why now? What is the reasoning for this policy to be put in place now? And then I have an off-topic question.
Well, as soon as President Trump came into office, he encouraged all of us as cabinet secretaries to evaluate every agency and department, see what we can do to save taxpayers money, keep more money in their pockets, to give them more opportunities to enjoy their freedoms and liberties, to keep them safe. And certainly that is my job as Homeland Security Secretary, is to evaluate everything that we do and make sure that we're protecting American citizens here in our homeland. So in working with TSA, we've gone back and evaluated all of our security screening processes and looked at how effective they've been, if they've yielded the results that we want, what kind of technologies can we implement that will keep people safer. I'm excited about the fact that we have the big, beautiful bill that has been signed and put into law. That'll give us resources that we can continue to invest in new technologies. That gave us the opportunity to focus on exit lanes. We can implement technologies there, new screening processes that will help us screen your bags faster, make sure that when we're going through checkout lanes and security lanes that we have the ability to scan individuals, potentially if people choose to opt in, use biometrics to identify people quicker so that they have the ability to go through much more in a streamlined fashion. So all of those resources will be plugged into making this a much more efficient, safe, and I would say advanced security system than we've ever had before. But that is, I think, the key to all of government under President Trump's administration, is that we evaluate everything that we do and make sure that it is something that is best serving the American people. And that's one of the reasons that you see this policy being implemented today.
All right, just listening in there, DHS Secretary Kristi Noem talking about this new initiative from TSA, the Transportation Security Administration, announcing they will no longer require passengers to remove their shoes during security checks at some U.S. airports. And certainly that is a big change in the air across all of these terminals around the country. And we do know a little bit of the history of this, as people have been taking off their shoes in lines at TSA for nearly 20 years now, as it was back in 2006 as the policy implemented nearly 5 years after 9/11, although no relation, when the shoe bomber used matches in an attempt to ignite explosives in a hidden device in his shoes on a flight from Paris to Miami. So this is a major development. I know passengers are going to be excited about this. Let's bring into the conversation right now aviation and national security expert, Dr. Stacey Tyler. Doctor, thank you so much for joining us here on Live Now from Fox. And walk me through some of this, step by step. What made this change and why now?
Well, it's amazing that after 2 decades that this policy change for removing the shoes for TSA, the security is very key when it comes to the 9/11 terrorist attack. Because of 9/11 terrorist attack, all of these measures had to be put in place. The advanced technology, the millimeters, the whole body imaging, the advanced imaging technology, the explosive detective systems were all technology that was put in place for TSA and the Department of Homeland Security. And because of this new policy change to remove the shoes, the vulnerabilities and the threats to the American soil, even though that there has not been a terrorist attack since 9/11, the exposure is greater because of removing the shoes. And even though that we had all of those advanced technologies in place, we still had prohibited items passing through security checkpoints. The 311 policy, liquids, perfume. And every time a gun was detected, it was put, in the news that at a particular airport that a gun was found. But however, those little measures, such as liquids and gels, they can still get through. So having your shoes removed was one of the preventative measures that was put in place that made the security effective for TSA. Because of those advanced technologies that were put in place, and now because I was listening that there is a new technologies being developed and created. My whole concern is the covert testing. The covert testing gives the Department of Homeland Security and the Transportation Security Administration to assess and improve security effectiveness. Now, in the past, my research was conducted at the Philadelphia International Airport on airport security. So this is one of the cities that is possibly the no shoe removal policy. And so here with the covert testing, the effectiveness is still questionable because items still can get through security checkpoint. And my study was dealing with the internal threat. That's the community behind the security checkpoint. We're not just talking about the prohibited items passing through. The shoe removal is going to give that greater risk, greater vulnerabilities. But however, there's another vulnerability that's looming at the airports, and is the internal threat. And that's the airline, airport, and TSA employees bringing drugs, weapons, and contraband passing through security checkpoints and or access points. And I had the opportunity to conduct my research at the Philadelphia International Airport.
Of course, there's going to be no perfect system to keep everything out. I do want to ask you, because we talk about different changes to TSA, it feels like at almost every airport, something different goes on during those screening processes. How long would it take to roll this out? Is it going to be as simple as happening overnight? How long would it take for this process to keep people having their shoes on?
Well, that's a great question, because as a former employee in the airline industry, I can recall when the 311 policy was implemented in our TSA security screening process, and it happened immediately. It was basically overnight. It's because the Great Britain terrorist attack unfoiled in Great Britain, and the flight was coming into the United States, and immediately the policy was implemented of no liquids, no gels, and that's the history of the 311 policy. So I am well aware how fast a change like this can occur firsthand, working in the airline industry. But as far as the shoe removal, it can be in phases, because those particular airports that were suggested, such as Philadelphia, Fort Lauderdale, you have Baltimore, key cities were selected, and it all depends on how effective the screening process is.
Yeah, and can you tell me, because this is just in the next list of things to come, and they talked about the technologies that advance so very well to putting it through. Does this signal to you that there's going to be changes on the horizon around laptops? I know that is going to be a point of contention for people getting it out. Taking off belts, hats, jackets. Do you think there are going to be more rollbacks in terms of these safety protocols with the technology improvements?
You know, that's very key. The key word you just said is rollback. I was in the airline industry before there was TSA in the Department of Homeland Security. And I could tell you, when we had subcontractors who did the screening process, and if we continue to roll back our processes, that we have put these preventative measures, that is really going to put our aviation system at risk and vulnerabilities, because our systems are going to be lax. Every airport does something different. It says that, you know, the screening, but the millimeters are, some airports are sensitive than the other, and different things like that. There's inconsistencies in the security process, screening process. So what I can say is that the rollback, I'm hoping that that's not the case, because again, I was in the airline industry when there was subcontractors screening, and the airline employees had to be at the security checkpoint to take documentations and help out. But at the end of the day, I just don't really want the rollback to happen, but it's possible.
All right, very good. And of course, to keep people safe, even if it is a hassle, keeping those shoes off might be a move. But of course, big developments today from Kristi Noem. Doctor, thank you so much for joining us here on Live Now from Fox. Great insight as always.
Thank you so much for having me.